Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Qwoted interview series where we talk to rock stars in the media, whether they be journalists, PR people, or subject matter experts who are frequently go-to for reporters. And today on the show, I have a real treat, someone who has elevated himself to the top of the podcasting world in music, and someone who, as a journalist, is an incredibly experienced reporter in arts and entertainment and the author of an incredible book, The Foie Gras Wars, on Simon & Schuster's imprint, and that is Mark Caro. Mark, hello. And I thought rather than give a long-winded and possibly inaccurate introduction, I wonder...
You would be accurate.
I would?
You know me. You'd be accurate. You're not going to make stuff up, but I appreciate it.
I'm a reporter. I don't make stuff up.
He doesn't. Not too often.
Tell us about your career and your background and the thing that you are doing right now with CaroPop.
Right. So to go backwards, right now I'm the host of the CaroPop podcast, which is approaching its 200th episode. It's a weekly podcast.
Wow.
And it's basically an outgrowth of the stuff I've done as a journalist over many, many years, which is that I really enjoy talking to people. And when I talk to students or something and they'll sort of like whatever advice I give, the advice I always give the most is be curious and listen. And those are two things that I really enjoy. And something I was at the Tribune, Chicago Tribune, for 26 years. And when I left, something I really missed was interviewing people and talking to people and going in depth with people. And I started an interview series at a club in the Chicago area named Space. And so it was Mark Caro's Talking in Space. And I was doing these onstage interviews that would last about an hour and 15 minutes or so. I had on like John Langford of the Mekons and Waco Brothers and Nora Dunn of Saturday Night Live and Len Casper, who was the Cubs play-by-play announcer at the time, now White Sox radio, also was debuting his new band at that show. And I loved doing it. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to shut it down. So I thought of changing it to Talking in Cyberspace. But then I thought, it's too much. There are too many people watching things on Zoom. It's really wearying. Why don't I just make it a podcast? It'll be easier to schedule. People won't have to worry about how they look, unlike us right now. And
how about this, people?
There you go. So I just started doing it, and it just sort of turned out. And I really sort of thought, so at the Tribune, as you know, I wrote a lot about film. I wrote a lot about movies. Film and movies are the same. I wrote about music. I wrote about food. I wrote about, a lot of things. I wrote about global city. Chicago is a global city. And so I thought that the podcast would be, I was going to call it Pop Machine because that was the name of my blog there, but that name's kind of being used in other ways. So CaroPop, nobody else was using. It's got the nice 3 syllables, CaroPop. And I figured it would be sort of split between movie people and music people with some chefs and authors thrown in. And as it's turned out, it's been 90% music people, sometimes producers, sometimes mastering engineers. The mastering engineer episodes, like with Kevin Gray or Bernie Grunman, have been among the most popular ones. Steve Albini, the late producer, his was extremely popular. And then musicians, like 3 members of XTC, those have been really popular. My first guest was Richard Thompson, who to me is just a legend, and I couldn't believe I was so grateful that he agreed to do it before I'd even launched the thing. Mike Mills of REM was on recently, Bob Mould of Husker Du and Sugar, but also just of being Bob Mould, who's awesome. And the musicians just have generally wanted to talk, and I've had to sort of jump through fewer hoops. Movie people, like actors, filmmakers, they tend to be so oriented around publicity for a certain project that they've been a little harder to schedule. But I had on Judd Apatow, I had on Jane Lynch, I've had on, George Wendt, the late George Wendt, who was wonderful.
Yeah.
And is a huge music fan too. So it's been a really great, selection of people.
Yeah. Both on stage, and I've seen you with John Cleese, and as a reporter, you are one of the best interviewers I have ever seen. And I'm wondering if you could give us some background in terms of how you approach interviewing. You talked a lot about listening, and you're a fantastic listener. I have seen that in action.
It really is that. It's interesting because when I started off, I would have a list of questions and I'd go through the questions. And when David Foster Wallace's, brilliant masterwork, Infinite Jest, came out in '96, I went down to Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois, where he was teaching. And I interviewed him and spent the day with him. And it was just one of these wonderful days on the job. And at some point, within the last several years, I found the cassette of that and I was listening to it. And it was earlier in my career. And I could hear myself sort of waiting to get to the next question and missing opportunities to follow up on stuff he was saying. And it drove me, it was really painful actually to listen to, because I was just like, I could have been better with this brilliant writer. And I wasn't, but it also made me think, well, the fact that I'm noticing it means that I did get better, because I now know that I would have followed up on stuff like that. And what I do when I prepare for an interview now is I just make like pages of questions. I do a lot of research, whether it's listening to their albums, reading their memoirs, reading their other interviews they've given, and trying to sort of come up with, just like kind of stuff that interests me. Like I'm not interested in just sort of like checking off the, what inspired this project? They're gonna say that anyway. But I really get driven by what I'm curious to ask. And then I have this whole list of questions and I try not to look at it. I just try not to look at it. Yeah. Because if I'm just talking to you and engaged with you and you're saying something, I'll remember what my questions are for the most part. But often, you would say something that refers to maybe a question I had in the middle of my list. And I don't want to be like, well, I'll get to that later. I want to hear what you have to say about it now, because you want this flow of conversation. So that's kind of the trick, is sort of over preparing and then putting it aside.
Yes. And on top of that, you have that X factor going for you, where you draw really unusual or insightful stuff out of your interviewees. And one story comes to mind because I was there, was when you interviewed Maestro Riccardo Muti of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and you somehow got him on this track where he talked about an animal. Maybe you could relate that anecdote, because to this day I just find it, how did Mark get that out of him?
Well, Maestro Muti is a wonderful talker and a brilliant sort of free-flowing thinker and free associator. What was it, a donkey? What was that?
I think it was a donkey.
I think it was a donkey. It was something with a donkey story. You must have felt this too, Lou, because you've interviewed a lot of people as well. And when you were like recording an interview with someone, wasn't often like the best thing, like right before you're finishing up, and you just sort of have a throwaway question at the end, and you'll just sort of say something, and then they'll just get going on something you just didn't expect, and then that ends up being the lead of your piece. Like a lot of times it's just people getting comfortable, and then, just being themselves. Like I just did an interview now that's going to go up tomorrow with a pretty big name person. And, when I conceived this podcast, it was not to do promotional stuff. Like to me, it was actually more interesting to find people who weren't promoting things. And then they were like, oh, someone wants to talk to me about my work. So like Bruce Thomas, Elvis Costello and the Attractions bassist, who hasn't been with that band for years. I'd somehow become friends with him on Facebook, and I just sent him a note. He didn't have anything to flog. He didn't have any like talking points that were prepared. He just wanted to talk, and he was up for talking, up for listening to me, ask a whole bunch of nerdy questions about playing with Elvis Costello. But this one that's going up tomorrow, it was like the big first part of the interview. They were like the talking points, and he was hitting the points. He knew what he was trying to promote, because he's promoting a new musical that he wrote the music for. And he was great, and his talking points were fine, and they were like answered people's questions about this project. But then getting over that hump, we were able to get into the weirder stuff, which is what I find more interesting. Even though the talking points were good, but you could hear the talking points in other interviews he's giving, but you would not hear a lot of the other points, including, it was Tom Morello, who, was wonderful. But I was asking him about sort of when he first started looking at the guitar as something he could get different sounds out of, as opposed to an instrument that he was going to learn the chords to or something like that. Mm-hmm. And went on this wonderful, discussion about like how he learned the difference between being a musician and being an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that I learned this term from another journalist, is the afterglow, right? It is that point where they're so comfortable and they're loose and they can sort of exhale, and then the most unusual stuff comes out. And just as you said, a lot of times that can be the lead of the story, or it's something surprising that no journalist has ever uncovered, and that not even the hardcore fans or followers of this person know about. So you really have a knack for getting that out of people.
Thank you, Lou. Part of it too, I think, is just having like natural curiosity and being genuine about things. There are a lot of people who ask. You'll watch, one of like the Hollywood shows or something, and they'll be asking questions about people's personal lives that you could tell that they think they're going to get clicks or audience, engagement on it. But it seems it's like a tacky thing to ask, and you don't think they're really interested in it. You think they're just sort of doing it because they feel like they should do it. And I don't know, like I don't ask tacky questions about people's personal lives because I just don't. If it's something that I wouldn't ask a friend, I'm not going to ask some, artist who I barely know. It's like, if they've been public about something, and like, if someone records their breakup album, then I think it's fair to ask about that. I guess I can't think of like my actually having done that particular interview, but in general, I remember when I started. And you were there around this time too. It was before, because we're old, it was before the internet. And when you were like interviewing someone like John Travolta, you would call the library and you'd say, hey, could I have whatever clips there are on John Travolta? And they would look in their databases in the library at the Tribune, and they would call up things and they would print out stuff and put it in a pneumatic tube that would shoot through the ceiling and pop into like a little container in the area where you were sitting, and you'd open it up and you'd pull out the papers and you'd read like biography, book, like the little summary of it. Whatever Wikipedia would be now, it would be that, but shorter. And then they'd find some like 4-year-old interview with him, and you would just sort of do it like that. And then maybe there would also be like a news story from the LA Times, and I'd be like, oh, well, he talked about this in the LA Times. Tribune readers should get to read that too. And so, like, maybe I would ask questions where I knew he was giving answers that were appearing in other papers, but there's no internet. You wouldn't know that it was in other papers. And I felt like that was going to make me sound like a legitimate Tribune reporter, because we all start off with imposter syndrome. And I thought, oh my God, I'm working for the Chicago Tribune. This better sound like all the other stories that are out there. And at some point, something clicked where I was like, and it wasn't just the internet making everything else available. It was also my own thought, like, wait, my goal should be to get the stuff that no one else has, not the stuff that everyone else has, because that's boring, So, and so I just kind of I consciously changed my approach at some point to not to be obscure, but just to ask what I was really interested in and not what I sort of felt was like assumed would be in the story.
Yeah. And as we ride off into the sunset here, one thing that occurs to me is that being a highlight in what you do, and curiosity being a big part of what you do, and research, which is a major challenge, being part of what you do. What has been the most rewarding part of the CaroPop adventure for you, and that is going to push you way beyond 200 episodes?
Ooh. I would love to be able to push beyond that. I need to figure out like how. I'm really great at creating content, and I need to make the rest of it work better, and that'll push me past 200 episodes. Yeah, when it's like I'll be at a show and someone will. There was one time I was at the. There's actually another one of these events coming up at a Wild Honey Foundation in LA, which is a wonderful organization, put on a concert a couple of years ago. That Lenny Kaye, who's Patti Smith's guitarist, and compiled the original Nuggets compilation in 1972 of all these garage rock, psychedelic, 3-minute songs.
Yeah, fantastic compilation.
Yeah, the Nuggets is just legendary. And there's like a box of like expanded version that came out for Record Store Day about a year and a half ago. No, a couple of years ago, because it was when this concert was. So they had a concert in LA to benefit this foundation. And it was a lot of people who have been on CaroPop and people who wanted to be on CaroPop, like Johnny Eccles from Love I met there, and Peter Zaremba I met there, and the late Mike Peters from The Alarm was there, and I'd already had on Scott McCoy and some other people, and so I went out to LA for this because I thought this will be great because there are all these people who've been on CaroPop, all these people I want to be on CaroPop. It's a great excuse to go to LA. It'll be a really cool show. And I was talking with someone outside before the show, and this guy comes up to me and goes, "Are you Caro?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes,
Fabian.
"Yeah."
Are you Caro?
Yeah. He goes, CaroPop. I recognize your voice because I listen to your podcast. And I have no friends who listen to the podcast, but I didn't know this LA entertainment lawyer was listening to the podcast, and then had really nice specific things to say about it. And it's like my wife is in radio, and she would be in a little booth talking, and sometimes you lose the sense that there are other people you're talking to. And so the idea that people were actually listening to it, and then someone would come up to me at a club and say, "Hey, I really loved your interview with William Bell, from Stax," some sort of one of the more obscure ones. That always, that's what sort of keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. I thought of one more thing I wanted to ask you, which is really...
This is that last thing that you throw in, and then you're going to get the best
part
answer.
of the podcast. I'm sorry. All that other stuff's great, but there is one thing that stands above.
The theme music?
The theme music. How did you know? You need to tell people about the theme music because of all the famous artists, you got this really incredible artist to come in and write and perform and produce the theme music.
Yeah, there's all this really kind of groovy music that I thought of using as the bed for CaroPop, but I didn't want to have to figure out how to license any of it. And so my friend Lou and we had sort of played with some stuff in his studio at some point, and I just made up this one little almost Devo-esque instrumental, and so we recorded it in your studio. I think you actually made me play all the instruments, which was really just putting stuff on a keyboard and programming it or whatever. It's pretty damn catchy.
It is.
I've thought of making it available as a Apple Music download that you could buy to support the podcast, but A, I haven't done that, and B, I'm not sure that I would make more than $2 on that, and it would probably be from members of my family.
Although if you released it for Record Store Day, I think a lot of people who are fans of the podcast and the musicians
we'd have to press
and
it up. We'd have to press up a 7-inch.
There we go.
That'd probably be more expensive than anyone would want to pay, but you never know.
And a B-side.
But I've been meaning to. Like after 200 episodes, I kind of feel like I should refresh it and I should redo this theme, but do it on kind of bass and vibes or something like that, just to sort of have a cool jazz version of it, or maybe open it up and say have a contest and say, you could do your version of the CaroPop theme and then we'll use that instead because I'm sick of mine. Not that I'm sick of it, it's fine.
Well, cool. Engaging, entertaining, informative, and led by someone who is known as one of the best arts and entertainment writers, reporters, and interviewers in the business, Mark Caro. Mark, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
The Qwoted interview series is brought to you by Qwoted, the world's #1, and you can look it up, platform for journalists, PRs, and subject matter experts. We want to send a shout out to the founders of Qwoted, Matt Neller and Dan Simon, and also to Kelly Jura, who is doing a lot to make this interview series possible. Until next time, I'm your host, Lou Carlozo. Stay true, stay strong, and stay suddenly connected.